Step into the profound teachings of Dharma Talks by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, brought to life in an immersive audio experience by Buddhist Audio Bookshelf. Delve into the wisdom and guidance offered by the venerable Thanissaro Bhikkhu, also known as Geoffrey DeGraff, a revered figure in contemporary Buddhism. His insights on mindfulness, meditation, and the path to awakening resonate deeply, offering solace and direction in our modern lives. This audiobook transcends barriers, allowing listeners to absorb the essence of Buddhist teachings, fostering inner peace and understanding. Its accessibility through audio format ensures that these invaluable lessons can accompany you wherever you go, fostering a profound connection with mindfulness and compassion. Join us in spreading these invaluable teachings by subscribing, liking, and sharing this audiobook. Together, let's illuminate the path to enlightenment, sharing the transformative power of the Buddha's wisdom far and wide. Embrace the journey toward self-discovery and spiritual growth through the enlightening words of Dharma Talks. Let's start with today's reading. Undirected Insight. November 23, 1995. Coming out to a place like this is very important for the mind, because the mind needs time to get away from its day-to-day issues. The affairs of daily life are like wind blowing across the surface of water. When the water is all ruffled up by the wind, you can't see what lies under the surface. So you have to come out to a place like this where there are not that many issues going on, just the very basic issues of keeping the body alive, walking when you need to walk, sitting when you need to sit, so that the affairs of the mind can come more and more to the forefront, so you can stop the wind ruffling the water. The surface of the water calms down and gets still, clear and smooth. Then you can look down inside, into the mind. And what the mind has to show, it's going to show at its own pace, in its own way. We may have come to the meditation with the idea that we'd like to deal with a particular problem, get something straightened out, or we're going to force the practice to go in certain stages and certain steps in line with what we've read. But as Ajahn Fuang said, the mind has its own stages, its own steps. Or as Ajahn Lee said, the ways of the mind are so complex you could never put them into a book. So we have a very simple technique. You focus on the breath. Be alert and mindful, and stay with the basic technique. When you do that over and over again, the things that are going to come up in the mind will come up, bit by bit, revealing themselves at their own pace. This is where patience comes into the practice. There are some issues you'd like to have dealt with right away, but they don't come up. The mind isn't ready to handle them. So you just chip away at the basic technique. When things come in their own way, it's like sanding wood. You polish the wood in order to bring out the grain that's already there. If you have preconceived notions of what you'd like the grain to look like and try to paint those designs on the wood, you end up not getting anything that looks natural. You cover up the grain that's already there. But if you simply polish the wood without any preconceived notions beyond the act of polishing, the natural grain of the wood will come out. The same with meditation. In the process of keeping the mind with the breath, you learn a lot of important things about the body and mind, many of which you didn't expect. This is why we always have to be open to whatever comes up in the course of the meditation, whatever insights, whatever realizations, whatever issues arise, because a lot of times the things that come up are more valuable than what you thought you were looking for. If you're too busy looking for something else, you won't see what's actually there. So meditation is a training in learning to be very patient with the mind, to be open with it, and to see as you subject the mind to the training what traits, what characteristics it shows to you. And you've got the basic technique to deal with whatever comes up. Many times what comes up is distraction, which we often find frustrating, but there are a lot of important lessons right there in that process of bringing the mind back. A lot of times we want to be done with it. When is this problem going to stop? Because we want to get on to the important stuff. Well, distraction itself is a very important issue. We've got to learn how to master bringing the mind back, because in doing that you learn an awful lot about the mind, a lot of unexpected things about how the mind slips off the breath, how it avoids certain issues, how it cooks up other issues to get in the way of seeing things it just doesn't want to see. And in the simple process of bringing the mind back, trying to be mindful, trying to be alert, you catch sight of things you didn't see before. They used to be in the blind spots, but now you begin to catch them out of the corner of your eye, as you keep at this very simple process. As the Buddha said, learning how to deal with the process of distraction can take you all the way to arahantship, when you've really mastered how to do it, when you're really good at it. This is a lot of what the Buddha's teachings are like. Just very simple techniques, very simple things to do with the mind, and the unexpected realizations that come up in the course of doing the technique. This is one of the reasons why you can't map out the ways of the mind. At the same time, though, you can't think that blindly following the instructions in the meditation is going to be enough. You've got to be as observant as possible, all around. That's why we say sometimes, you've got to play with the meditation. You've got to have a sense of experimentation, because oftentimes the things you catch out of the corner of your eye as you're working with a technique are the important realizations. Those are the things that make a real difference. So when you sit down and meditate, even though you've seen the steps of the path laid out, you may have a general idea of what it's all about and where it's going. Still, you've got to put that knowledge aside. We're here training the mind, and yet the mind is both trainer and trainee. The map is for the trainer side of the mind, just so you know in general where you're headed, where you're going, but when the mind itself is being trained, you have to put the map aside and just see what's right there in the present as it comes up. And in the course of dealing with the practice, a lot of unexpected things do come up, and you have to be ready for them, notice them as they come. So stick with your basic technique, but keep your range of vision broad. And don't try to define things too heavily in advance. The purpose of the meditation is to become more and more familiar with the ways of the mind. The knowledge that comes with familiarity goes very deep, but it comes in little increments. It's like getting to know a person. You can't just walk up to someone and smile and shake hands and become friends. You can be friendly at the beginning, but actually becoming friends takes time to get to know the person's strengths and weaknesses, sense of humor, the things you can trust him on, the things you can't trust him on. All these forms of knowledge come in a very indirect way. When unexpected events arise and you begin to see that person in a different light, how he behaves in an emergency, how he behaves when you're in trouble. This is how you get to know the other person. It takes time. The same with the mind. You focus on the basic technique of keeping with the breath, and eventually you stumble over some really important veins in the mind. They may be veins of gold, veins of diamond, or an old layer of garbage that got laid down sometime way back in the past. But the basic technique is just being here, being observant, watching what happens, and the things will come out layer by layer by layer as they were laid down. So when you meditate, you can't sit down and say, okay, this particular session I'm going to understand this, or I'm going to attain that. I'm going to understand dependent co-arising. I'm going to understand my childhood hang-ups. That doesn't get you anywhere. Just tell yourself, for this breath I'm going to be right here. I'm going to be mindful. I'm going to try to settle down with the breath as well as I can. There are parts of the meditation you can will, which is why the Buddha talks about them. For example, the type of awareness you have. You can will to be aware of the whole body as you breathe in. You can will to be aware of the whole body as you breathe out. You can will to let the breath grow calm. You can will to focus your attention on pleasure or rapture or wherever you want to focus it in regard to the breath. Those are things you can will. That's the difference between concentration and insight. Concentration is a matter of using your will. It's fabricated, as the Buddha says. But insight is something you can't will. Even though you tell yourself I'm going to be very carefully noting this and noting that, that's a very precise form of concentration. It's not vipassana, it's not insight. The insight is the understanding that comes when you suddenly see things right in front of you, and many times it's not what you were told you were going to see. And the real test as to whether it's genuine insight is if it brings the mind to peace. Even when it's genuine insight, You have to let it go when it has done its work and just go back to the technique. If it's something that really makes a big difference in the mind, it can't help but make a difference in the mind. You don't have to memorize it, you don't have to jot it down, or try to make yourself see things in that light from then on in. That's a false kind of insight, in which your perceptions cover up the possibility of any new insights arising right after them. So whatever comes up in the practice, you take note of it and let it pass. If it's important, it'll shift the ground under your feet. If it's not, then why bother with it? Just let it go. Your one job is to stick with the basic steps of the practice. This is why the Buddha's meditation instructions are so very simple. He focuses on how you breathe, where you focus your attention, what range of awareness you develop. That's pretty much all the instruction he gives. He gives a few warnings about some of the issues that'll come up, and how you should contemplate them. If anything comes up, you contemplate it as being impermanent, as being stressful. Sometimes some very delightful, exquisite sensations come up. And you've got to stay with them until you see where even they are stressful, even they can be a burden, and you can let them go. If particular problems come up, things like lust, anger, or delusion, sleepiness, restlessness and anxiety, uncertainty, the Buddha has particular techniques for dealing with them. But then he has you get back to the breath when the issue has passed, for this is your home base. The breath, he said, is the most refreshing form of meditation. He compared it to the first rainstorm of the rainy season. If you've ever been in Asia during the hot season, you know what it's like when the first rains come. There's been dust in the air for months and months, along with the oppressiveness of the heat. All of a sudden the rain comes and washes everything, cools everything off. The air is suddenly clear like it hasn't been for months. That's the image the Buddha gives for breath meditation. When the breath is refreshing, it'll wash away all unskillful states. So you want to keep the breath as your home base. It may seem a little bit too simple, but that's just the verdict coming from the part of the mind that's planning things and figuring things out in advance. So just stick with it, stick with it, stick with the breath. And what's going to come up is going to come up. It may come up in little bits and pieces, but it comes up as your own insight. Using your own insight is a lot better than using the insight you get in books, because those things are borrowed. You're not always sure you're using them at the right time or in the right place. But when the mind gets to the point where you've polished it with the breath, the insights that arise can be just right for the time and place. And you can test them right there to see if they are. It's a very natural process. It's a process that allows the mind to see clearly into itself, whatever is there. Just don't try to plan things in advance, because you have to remember we're all operating from ignorance, and our plans and designs on the practice come from ignorance as well. So you give yourself the technique with a minimum of planning and a minimum of designing. When you stick with that, the things that couldn't come out before, that didn't have the opening, can arise within the mind, at their own pace, in their own time. And they're more likely to be true. Sensitize yourself. May 16, 1999. The breath is so close to the mind, and yet for most of us it's uncharted territory. It's like those old maps they had back in the 16th and 17th centuries. They'd have a cartoon version of the coastline of North America and a big blank white space right in the middle, with a little inscription that said, "Here be tigers, here be wild beasts," or whatever. But it's pretty much unknown territory, unknown land, even though it's right next to us. There's nothing closer to the mind than the breath, yet our focus is always on something a bit farther away. We've actually taught ourselves to ignore the breath so that we can pay attention to other things. Yet the message of meditation is that it's actually much more important to be here with the breath, because it puts you in touch with things that really are important in life. The breath is like a mirror for the mind. Changes in the mind show up in the breath very quickly. Sometimes you may not be aware of what's going on in the mind itself, but if you're in touch with the breath, then you'll know something's wrong. Say, when anger arises, there'll be a tightness in the breath, a tightness in the chest that wasn't there before. When fear arises, your heartbeat and breathing rate change. So staying in touch with the breath is an excellent way of getting yourself in touch with what's going on with the mind. At the same time, being in touch with the breath is the best way of staying in touch with how the body's faring. If, when you're eating, you stay in touch with the breath, you get a better sense of when you've eaten too much, or not enough, or when something doesn't agree with you. What we're doing here is learning to sensitize ourselves to a layer that we've learned to desensitize ourselves to, so that we can pay attention to other things. Now we come back and we have to unlearn all those habits. And it takes a while. The important thing in the meditation is to set up the right questions. Just ask yourself, how are things going with the breath right now? When you sense the breath, exactly what are you sensing? How do you know the breath is coming in? How do you know the breath is going out? Look into these sensations carefully because they have a lot to tell you. The guides that are written down, like Ajahn Lee's 7 steps, are just to get you started. He, himself, when he gave talks on breath meditation, would explore all sorts of other aspects of the breath that aren't mentioned in the 7 steps, at least not in detail. You might explore one particular step at a time and discover all sorts of new things in there, new implications of what the breath can do both for the body and for the mind. So there's a lot of territory to explore here. The 7 steps just cover what's really basic, what's really essential. You'll find that when the mind finally does settle down and you come out and consider, what happened this time? Why did it settle down so much better than last time? If you look at the 7 steps, you'll find that you had them all covered. Whether you were actively thinking about them or not is not the issue. The fact that the mind really was keeping in touch with the right center for itself in the body, the breath was feeling just right, the quality of the breath was good, the sense of the breath going throughout the whole body gave a sense of wholeness and fullness, everything in the body seemed to be coordinated, and your awareness filled the body. When you've got all those steps brought together, and they're not one after the other steps, they're 7 factors of a well-balanced mind. When all 7 factors are there, the mind settles down. It feels good about settling down. It feels like it's settling down in a healthy, sound, and wholesome way. So if things aren't going right in your meditation, take a mental note. Say, well, which of the factors is lacking right now? And then work on that. As you work on it, you find that often it has more implications than you might have assumed to begin with. What this comes down to is learning how to sensitize yourself, to listen to the quality of the breath the same way a pianist listens to himself play. The more sensitive you are as a listener, the better a pianist you are. The more sensitive you are in listening to the breath, the better a breather you become, and the more the breath can do for you. So here's this whole area here in the present moment. The field of energy in which you find yourself sitting here right now. Instead of thinking of the body as a solid lump sitting here, think of it as a field of energy. Your sense of it as a solid lump is based on what you've seen, but when you sit here and feel the body from the inside, it has a different quality entirely. If you can get in touch with how it actually feels as opposed to the mental picture that you've imposed on top of it, you develop a whole new sense of what's going on here. So you learn to get yourself more and more in touch with what's actually experienced directly right here and now, through your sense of feeling the body from the inside. And it's right there that the mind can really settle down solidly. If you have to visualize the body, well, visualize it in the ways that Ajahn Lee recommends. Think of the breath energy flowing throughout the whole body, out the pores. In one of his earlier versions of the 7 steps, he talked about working with the breath energy in the body, and then working on the breath energy that surrounds the body. There's a field that surrounds the body. If you get in touch with that, then there's a lot more to play with. So there's plenty here to keep you absorbed in the present moment. Focusing on just these issues accomplishes an awful lot. It gets the mind to settle down in the present moment. It gets you more sensitive to the present moment, it gets the mind more connected to the body in a healthier way, and it helps you learn about the breath energy and what it can do for you. So you learn to make use of this healthier sense of breathing that comes when the mind is really sensitive to what's going on. Once you're able to settle down with the sensation of the breath energy right in the present moment, you've got a foundation. And the trick then is learning how to take that foundation and use it in other contexts as well, not just when you're sitting here with your eyes closed. Stay with this foundation when you get up, walk around, deal with people, do whatever your work may be. Try to be in touch with this flow of energy in the body. It gives a whole new quality to your life. At the same time, the skills that you're learning here, sitting with your eyes closed, can also be used outside. Being in touch with the breath gives the mind a sense of being at home, no matter where it is. Wherever you go, the breath is there. The sense of fullness that comes from learning how to breathe with a sense of the whole body gives a strong sense of nourishment both to the body and to the mind. And you find that you're hungering less for specific things to happen. Your sense of wanting people to say things like this or act like that gets loosened up quite a bit. When people say things that don't strike you as proper, don't strike you as what you want, then you're not all that upset about it. It's almost as if in the past you were looking for food from other people, and you had to accept whatever scraps they spit in your direction. Of course you got upset when they gave you garbage. But now you don't need food from anyone else. The mind is getting its nourishment right here simply through breathing. So what other people serve up to you or spit at you is no longer a big issue because you don't need their food. You've got your own food, your own nourishment, right here. At the same time, you're more in touch with the mind's reactions to things. You'll notice, say, when there's a catch in the breath, a tightness in the chest, a tightness in the stomach, or your hands or arms begin to tense up. You know something's wrong and new emotion has appeared in the mind. If you don't have the time to deal with that emotion immediately, you can just breathe through it in the same way that you breathe through any sense of tightness or tension in the body as you're sitting here meditating. It helps to dissipate the antsy feeling that you've got to get that anger, or whatever it is, out of your system by saying something or doing something. You don't have to say or do anything. Just breathe right through the feeling and let it dissipate out. That way, the tense, nervous energy is gone. Then you have the chance to look at the purely mental side of what's going on. Are you angry? Are you afraid? What's the emotion that made a change in the body? And what's the best thing to do right now? Once you're free from the feeling that you've got to get something out of your system, you can act in a much more reasonable, much more appropriate way. So the skills that you're learning as you're sitting here meditating are useful in all contexts. It's simply a question of having the mindfulness and the alertness and the right approach to the problem that enables you to put these skills to use, to remember them and use them when they're needed. So this issue of being sensitive to the breath is an important skill, a basic survival skill for the mind, so you can get through life without creating a lot of bad karma, a lot of unnecessary suffering for yourself, and unnecessary suffering for other people as well. So stay close to home. Don't overlook the potential of what you've got to learn from right here, right now, right here at the breath. The part of you that's as close as life itself. Clearing a space. March 2001. Practice would be easy if the problems of the mind were neat and orderly, if they fit into nice categories and came in nice, graduated steps, starting first with the easier problems and moving up gradually to the harder ones. That way the practice could be neat and orderly, too. You'd start out with virtue, and when your virtue is perfected you could focus on concentration, and then when concentration is perfected you could focus on discernment. It would all be very nice and systematic. The problem is that the mind is not systematic. It's chaotic. Now, we all know that chaos has its patterns, but the patterns are very complex. That means you have to be ready for anything at any time. Sometimes very difficult problems get thrown at you before you're really ready to handle the easy ones. So when you're working on virtue, concentration, and discernment, they all have to come together. You have to be ready to use whichever tools you need when they're needed. Often you find out that you have to start out with discernment, the faculty we're told comes at the end. When I was staying in Thailand with Ajahn Fuang, I'd feel frustrated when he'd say, "Use your panna." That's the Pali and Thai word for discernment. That was back in the days when the only translation I knew for Panna was wisdom. And I kept thinking, how am I going to use my wisdom when I don't have any? But he was talking about a faculty we all have. We all have discernment to one extent or another, and you have to put it to use all the time while you're practicing. You put it to use when you're observing the precepts, you put it to use when you're practicing concentration. For example, in practicing the precepts, there are times when you're in a difficult position, when it's really hard to keep to the precepts you've promised yourself you're going to hold to. Sometimes you're asked a question, and you don't want to answer it for one reason or another, and of course you can't lie. So, the question is, how are you going to use your discernment to get around that question? How are you going to use your discernment to maintain your precepts even when it gets difficult? The same when practicing concentration. You have to use a certain amount of discernment just to get the mind to settle down. Figuring out which object you're going to focus on, how you're going to deal with the breath, figuring out which kinds of breath sensations you should focus on, which you should let go, which are the ones you've got to change, and at what point you have to stop changing them, and just let things be so the mind can really settle down. All of this requires a certain level of discernment. Then there are other outside issues that come in as well, because as the mind settles down, you start running into things. It's as if they're lying in wait for you. Sometimes the issues may be recent events, things that just happened today. Other times they may go back a long way. Sometimes you find issues from your childhood suddenly coming up to the surface of the mind. After all, there's less activity on the surface, which allows things that are deeper down in the water to come floating up. The issue then is how to deal with those things in a way that doesn't destroy your concentration, doesn't get you off the path. Sometimes you can just remind yourself, okay, I'm not ready for that particular issue yet, and put it aside. Other times it just keeps coming back, and you've got to deal with it in some way or another, and you can't wait until your powers of concentration are fully developed before you can turn on it, because it's right there, breathing down your neck, blocking your attempts at concentration. So, your first line of defense is to try to figure out how the Four Noble Truths apply to this issue. These are the Buddha's basic terms of analysis for just about everything that comes into the mind. These are the terms of appropriate attention. When an issue comes up, try to figure out where it lies on that field. Is it an issue of suffering? An issue of craving? Those are usually where the issues lie. There's very rarely an issue of the cessation of suffering or the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So when it's suffering, what's the proper approach? The proper approach is to analyze it. How do you analyze it? Not in terms of psychoanalysis, taking things back to your childhood. Just analyze what's happening right in the present. Where is the suffering right now? What kind of suffering is it? Where is the physical side? Where is the mental side? Sometimes you can deal with the physical side just by breathing through it. That makes it a lot easier to deal with the mental side. Wherever there's suffering, there's bound to be craving as well. Look for that. There's bound to be clinging, too. Look for the clinging. The clinging is something you want to learn to analyze, the craving is something you want to learn to let go. You may not be able to get all the way through the problem in one session, but at least you've got the proper approach. You're learning to step back from the problem, not identify with it as my problem or with the I'm suffering in there. Just look at it in terms of, where's the suffering, where's the clinging, where's the craving? When you can see the issues from this point of view, they're a lot easier to deal with. Even though you may not be able to work totally through the issue, at least you're headed in the right direction. In other words, you take whatever discernment you've got and you put it to use. It's like going down to the gym. You want a nice strong body, but where are you going to get that nice strong body? You take the weak body you've got and you put it to work. That's where the strong body comes from. Now, you can't wait until you've completed your course at the gym and your body is really strong before you come out and use your strength to deal with work outside. You take whatever body you've got, whatever strength you've got, and apply it to the work at hand. Whether the Work gets done totally and completely and with a lot of finesse, or just enough to pass by. The fact that you're using the strength you have is what builds the strength you need for the next time around. The same principle applies to the mind. Often your distractions are going to come back again, but at least if you can learn how to deal with them enough to clear a little space in the mind for the time being, and that allows you to get back to your concentration. At the same time, you're preparing yourself to deal with them even more effectively the next time around. In other words, the issue may be a huge tangle of things, and you're able to untangle one little bit, but when you untangle that, things loosen up in the mind. When they loosen up, you've got your opportunity to get back to your concentration practice. Now, when there are no apparent problems, you can't be complacent. Don't think as you're drifting along through the day and things are nice and easy that they're going to be nice and easy all the time. Sometimes huge issues suddenly come bubbling up into the mind. Remember the word fermentation? The asavas that lie down there can come bubbling up at any time. So when things are easy, when things are going well, make the most of the opportunity to practice concentration, to strengthen the mind. Strengthen your mindfulness, strengthen your alertness, so that when the issues finally do present themselves, you've got weapons to fight them with. Discernment, on its own, can't deal with them. Discernment needs the strength that comes from concentration, that comes from mindfulness and alertness, that comes from your conviction in the principles of karma. All the 5 strengths: conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, discernment, have to work together. Otherwise your discernment will just start analyzing things and get further and further away from what's actually happening in the mind. That's not the kind of analysis you want. You want to keep coming back to what's happening right here, right now, what you're experiencing right here, right now. Keep the present as your frame of reference. Even though the issue may be dealing with something from the past, try to remember that your experience of that memory is happening in the present. Keep that point in mind as you're dealing with whatever comes up. Then you find it a lot easier to pull yourself out, to deal with the issue as you can, to create some space, so that it's not hogging your whole attention, not consuming the mind. This is very important because, as I said, we can't wait until the concentration is totally mastered before we have to deal with these issues. We're going to have to deal with these issues all along. Our purpose is to create some space so that we can continue our practicing. Don't get upset if the issue keeps coming back. The times between its visits are your times to practice straight concentration. When the issues come back, you take whatever concentration you've got, whatever discernment you can develop out of that concentration, and deal with them again. Ultimately, there will come a time when these issues get cut at the root. Up until that time, you just have to keep learning to live with them, learning how to keep them at bay. You know they're there. The trick is practicing so that they don't totally overwhelm you. After all, if you wanted to, you could think of all kinds of things to worry about. There's always something that could get in the way of your practice. There are a lot of issues to worry about in this world. You could spend your whole day, your whole life, worrying about this, worrying about that. Death could come at any time. Your death, the death of your family, the death of other people. It's there just waiting to happen. And yet, why are we able to live without being consumed by that fear? This shows that the mind has practice, at least to some extent, in being selective in what it focuses on. Well, learn to use that capacity for the sake of your concentration. Create a little compartment for your practice here. Learn how to protect that compartment. It's going to be one of the weakest parts of your mind for a while because it's new. Other concerns have gotten themselves entrenched in the mind. They're really good at screaming for your attention, demanding your attention, saying, "This has to be dealt with right now, do you hear?" As for the practice, getting the qualities that you need in the mind, that has to learn to be vocal, too. And it has to be strong as well, so that it can make room for itself, push these less vital issues out of the way. When you're practicing, it's not neat and orderly like it is in the texts. The texts say that there's stage 1, stage 2, and then finally you come to the very end. It's like going to school. You go from first grade up to 12th grade, and then finally you go to college and then you're done. But the state of your mind as you're actually practicing goes up and down, all the time. You have to deal with all kinds of different problems, and you have to use whatever virtue, concentration, and discernment you've got to deal with things as they come, to deal with things willy-nilly for the purpose of making more space for yourself to practice. In the course of this, both doing the straight practice and dealing with whatever distractions come up, learning how to sidestep some of them, learning where the jugular is on some of them so you can just get rid of them, other times saying, okay, I can't really deal with this one yet, but I can push it out of the way for the time being. That develops your virtue, your concentration, and your discernment as well. So, if you develop the right attitude, you find that these things distracting you are all part of the practice, too. They're coming to test you. That's one of the reasons why monks go out into the forest. They hear about mindfulness. They hear about heedfulness. They hear about concentration and discernment. Well, see what it's like when you go out to the forest with all those animals and all those potentials for danger. You might starve tomorrow. No one might put food in your bowl. All these things are outside your control. What do you have to hold on to? Your concentration and discernment. Get the mind into concentration so that it's not overwhelmed by worries. The dangers are still out there as they were before, but you learn how to turn them off. You begin to realize that the whole problem is not the dangers out there. It's that your mind is totally out of control. When you can bring it under control, you've developed a really important skill. Mindfulness takes on a whole new meaning. Concentration, heedfulness, discernment, these all take on a whole new meaning once you've learned to use them in this way. So you see as you get into the practice that it's not like a textbook. You can learn all the words, but they don't have the same meaning as when you've learned to put them into practice, drawing on whatever resources you have when you really need them. When events come and you're not ready to deal with them, but you've got to deal with them, what are you going to do? If you're up for that kind of challenge, then the practice really develops. Really does become an adventure in the mind, something that makes you grow in ways you would have never imagined. Respect for heedfulness. March-April, 2001. One who sees danger and respects being heedful. Something we chant every week. And where does that respect lead? Where does that heedfulness lead? They lead to the presence of Nibbana. It's because they lead there that they're so important. And that's why Buddhism focuses on suffering and stress. To give rise to the kind respect for heedfulness that will take us beyond suffering. Some people accuse Buddhism of being very pessimistic and negative, focusing only on suffering and stress, as if it were denying that there is any pleasure in life. But the Buddha never denies pleasure. He talks about it very openly. The problem with pleasure, though, is that it leads to being complacent. When things go well, we start getting lazy. And we just stay right there. Life doesn't get any better than that, we think, as long as we're complacent. It's when we realize that there must something better than this ordinary everyday pleasure, something not mixed up with ordinary everyday pain, and that this something better is going to have to depend on us. That's when we start getting heedful. We realize that unless we do something about the state of our minds, we're not going to get any better than this. And so for the purpose of learning how to get to Nibbana, the Buddha has us focus on pain, suffering, stress, however you want to translate dukkha. If we can understand how the mind puts suffering together, we begin to untangle all the mind's attachments, all the ways it makes and creates unnecessary problems for itself. At the same time we start opening ourselves up to something better. So we focus on suffering because it's a learning opportunity. In fact, the Buddha actually has us treat suffering with respect. He calls it a noble truth. It's not just any everyday, ordinary old truth. He says to look at it as a noble truth, something worthy of respect, something worthy of comprehension. Really look into it. Don't dismiss it. Don't try to run away from it. Open yourself up to learning from it. There's room for respect for happiness as well. If you search around in the Noble Truths, you find happiness, pleasure, and rapture tucked away under the fourth Noble Truth, in right concentration. That's the kind of happiness you can learn from, the happiness that comes together with mindfulness and real clarity. Because on the one hand it puts the mind in a state where it can see suffering and not be threatened by it, and at the same time that kind of happiness itself ultimately becomes an object you want to explore. You use it as a tool, and then, when you've taken it as far as it can take you, you turn around and start exploring it as well. You begin to see that there's even some stress and suffering in there. So these are the things we should respect: suffering and the right kind of happiness. That's why the Buddha calls them Noble Truths. If we don't have respect for these things, where does our complacency? Says, complacency is the path to death. And the complacent are as if already dead. In other words, they're not alive to the opportunities lying before them. If we really do follow the path, if we're diligent at it, keep with it, stick with it, it opens us up to Nibbana. And when people reach Nibbana, they look back on the pleasures of their daily lives before and see that they were an awful lot of burden, an awful lot of stress compared to what they found. Our problem is that we haven't reached the point where they are, so pleasures look pleasurable to us, they look pretty good. We don't want to give them up quite yet. We get a nice spot in our meditation and say, this isn't so bad. We can stay right here for a fair while. But it's also precarious. Stress is built into not only the first Noble Truth, but also the second and the fourth. This is part of the Buddha's genius. Once he'd attained or experienced what is uncompounded or unconditioned, he looked back at conditioned reality and saw that in comparison to what he had attained, all of it was stressful, all of it was burdensome. But he also saw that you can't take the uncompounded and use it as a path to the uncompounded. Things won't work that way. You have to learn how to take the compounded and use it as a path. So he divided compounded reality, things made up of causes and conditions, into three things: stress, its cause, and the path to its end. And he gave us a task for each of them. Our task is to comprehend the stress and suffering, to abandon the cause, and to develop the path. Ultimately, though, you get to the point where stress has been comprehended, its cause has been abandoned, and the only thing left is to relinquish the path itself. This is why the Buddha has us focus on the issue of stress, and particularly the stress and suffering that come with clinging. When you actually see them, you stop being so complacent about your clingings, about your attachments. You begin to realize that even the most subtle form of pleasure on the everyday level has some clinging mixed into it, and that particular clinging opens the bridge for all kinds of suffering to come into the mind. Once you build that kind of bridge to things, anybody can come over the bridge. Pleasure can come over the bridge, pain can come over the bridge. Once you latch on to the body and say, this is me, this is mine, you lay claim to it. Then whatever happens to the body suddenly becomes a burden to the mind. We latch onto it because we find there are certain pleasures in the body. Once that bridge is open, though, all the pains can come along as well. So try to get the mind into a state of good solid concentration. That way it can look back on those attachments with some detachment, some objectivity, and see all the things you cling to that you really like, that you really identify with. When you look objectively, you see that there really is some problem in holding on in that way. And when the mind is in good enough shape, it's willing to let go. So when the Buddha has us focus on the stress and the suffering that come from clinging, it's not that he's trying to badmouth the world or to deny pleasure. It's just that there's something better than this. And the way to find that something better is to focus on the way the mind reacts to pain. If you really want to understand the mind, that's the place to understand it. There are all the issues in the mind that come thronging around the pain, whereas ordinary, everyday pleasures just tend to cover things up, so that they're not as clear. This is why the Buddha has us have respect for the sufferings we undergo, because we can learn from them. There's an interesting passage in the canon where the Buddha talks about the reason for respect, and it's basically to learn. When there's respect, you open up your mind. There's the possibility of learning something new. If there's no respect, the mind is closed. It dismisses things really easily. And as a result, it loses a really good opportunity to learn. This is why the attitude of respect is built into the Buddha's teachings. A lot of people think that Buddhism is an interesting philosophy, perhaps a very good philosophy, that somehow got religion tacked onto it, with all the bowing and all the other paraphernalia that go along with religion. And they'd like to separate the two. Can't we just have the philosophy without the religion? But if you look at the nature of the Buddha's philosophy, his teachings on the Four Noble Truths, the whole attitude of respect is built into the teaching itself. When you realize that the big issue here is the possibility of a great deal of pain or a lot of pleasure, true pleasure, it puts an edge on the teachings. It's not just an interesting description of things. It points out a dilemma we're all placed in. We've got to do something about it, for otherwise we just keep cranking out suffering all the time. If you've got any concern for your own well-being, you've got to take these truths seriously. And fortunately, the nature of suffering is something you can learn from and something you can do something about. The whole teaching on causality, the fact that your experience of the present is a combination of past factors plus your present input, means that you can develop skill in this area. If everything were totally predetermined, everything would be like a machine and there'd be no reason for respect because you couldn't learn anything useful about it. You'd just be stuck in the machine, unable to do anything about it. On the other hand, if everything were totally uncaused or totally random, again, there'd be no reason for respect. There'd be nothing to learn because what you learned at work today wouldn't necessarily work tomorrow. But our experience is shaped by patterns of causality, with some influence coming to it from the past, but also with the possibility for us to add influences in the present, right here, right now. That's why respect is built into that causality. Respect for the principle itself, that there's something to learn from. But it's complex. After all, the kind of causality the Buddha talks about is the same kind that creates chaos theory, which means that causes aren't all that simple. There's a lot to be learned. But it's all right here in the present moment, which means you have to have respect for your own ability to learn as well. After all the causes the Buddha talks about are things right here. When he describes causality, he says, this comes with that, when there is this, there is that. The this and the that are things right here in front of us. So knowing that, you have to have respect for your own ability. But, since it's complex and such an important issue, we'd be wise to have respect for people who have followed the path and gotten results. That's why we pay so much respect to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, so that we don't have to keep reinventing the Dhamma wheel. So, based on this principle of causality, there are 3 things we need to respect. First, the principle itself, because reality is not totally arbitrary. You can't just make up things. You can't decide, well, today I'm going to act on desire, and I'm going to make desire a good thing. If it's an unskillful quality in the mind, it's going to lead to unskillful actions. There's no way around that. That's a part of reality against which you just keep banging your head unless you learn to have some respect for it. Secondly, respect for yourself, your own ability to do the practice. And also, at the same time, having respect for your desire to gain true happiness. The ordinary way of the world is to say, oh, true happiness, unchanging happiness. Forget about it. Focus instead on the things we can sell to you. Lower your sights. That's what the world says. The Buddha says, no, have respect for your desire for true happiness. When you get complacent, you've lost respect for that desire. When you're heedful, you're keeping that desire in mind, showing it the proper respect. So, respect for yourself means 2 things. 1. Respect for your desire for true happiness, and 2. Respect for your ability to do something about it. That's built into the principle of causality as well. And finally, given the complexity of the principle, you need respect for those who have followed the path. Someone like the Buddha who discovered the path. And a Sangha, people who followed the Buddha's example and found the same freedom, total freedom from suffering, the same true happiness. respect for the teaching that the Buddha and the Sangha have passed on. When you have this proper attitude of respect for heedfulness, the proper respect for stress and pain, respect for the kind of happiness that forms the heart of the path, and respect for concentration that's also in the chant, that's the attitude that will bring you to the presence of Nibbana. So there's no clear-cut line between Buddhism as a philosophy and the more religious side of Buddhism where the etiquette of respect comes in. What's important, though, is that we understand the attitude of respect. There's one passage where the Buddha talks about how, 1. The attitude of respect gives you a grounding, and 2. It enables you to learn. The purpose of respect is to learn. To open your mind. Not only does it open your mind, but also when other people see that you're respectful of the truth, they're happy to teach. Whoever has any knowledge is willing to share it. In fact, for the monks, they're supposed to have respect for everybody. If someone criticizes a monk, the monk is supposed to treat that person with respect, whether the person's right or wrong. Try to keep an open mind because many times you learn from unlikely people, unexpected sources. They might have something good to say. So we're taught never to be dismissive when we're criticized. After all, the principle of causality is right here in the present, not only for you to observe, but for other people to observe as well. So everyone has that potential to have some very useful observations. This is why Ajahn Fuang one time said that an attitude of respect is a sign of intelligence. If you want to learn, if you want to master the way to the end of suffering, an attitude of respect is a very important quality. Respect for heedfulness. Understand that the principle of causality means that there's great potential for danger. If we misuse that principle, we can cause ourselves a lot of unnecessary suffering. But the respect for the training, the respect for concentration, that's respect for our potential to use that principle of causality for very good ends. Total release. Total freedom. So instead of being negative or pessimistic, the Buddha's teachings are extremely positive, much more positive than anything else in the world. They say that our desire for true happiness is realistic, worthy of the highest respect. The power of the focused mind. March-April 2001. The greatest power in our lives is the power of the mind. For most of us, that power is scattered around, so we don't get much use of it. When it is directed at something, it's usually directed in the wrong place. We start focusing on things that cause us a lot of suffering, cause the people around us a lot of suffering. This is why, if we want to get the most use out of this power, we have to learn how to train it. 1. To get it focused in the right way, and 2. To apply that focused power to the right issues. When we're practicing concentration, that's the first order of business, to get the mind properly focused. There are all kinds of wrong concentration that can do the mind a lot of harm. You may focus on thoughts that lead to anger, on thoughts that lead to depression, on thoughts that are self-destructive. That's the most typical way most people focus their minds. So when the Buddha says to have respect for concentration, he wants you to realize that you've got a very potent tool here, one that you've got to learn to use properly. For most of us it's easy to get focused on things that are detrimental to ourselves, but very hard to get focused on the topics of right concentration. It requires patience. When the Buddha talks about right concentration, he uses the word jhana, which is related to a verb for burning, jayati. Pali has lots of different verbs for burning, but this is the one that describes the burning of the flame of an oil lantern or an oil lamp or a candle in a place where there's no wind. The flame is steady, calm, consistent. That's the kind of quality you want in your mind. Most of the time the mind is like a different kind of fire, burning with the fires of greed, aversion, and delusion. Those are like a burning log. The flames leap around and are very erratic. But what we want is to adjust the fuel, adjust the flame, to bring the mind to a still fire of steadiness and still focus. So we start out small, and you have to protect that small point of focus. You're focused on the point of your nose, the middle of your head, the middle of the chest, whichever point feels most comfortable. Focus on that point and shelter it from other influences. In other words, other thoughts may come to the mind, but you don't latch on to them, don't let them cause that little flame to waver. Protect it, the same way you'd cup a small flame in your hands when you're trying to get a fire started in the midst of a wind. And after a while, as you don't pay attention to those other thoughts that coming blowing into the mind, it means that you're not feeding them. They begin to go away. When the fire finally catches, then you can let it spread throughout the body, so you have that same quality of steadiness and intentness and just rightness, filling your whole awareness. The body is saturated with awareness. The images they use in the canon are, first, kneading these good breath sensations into the body the same way you'd knead water into a ball of bath powder. Once the whole body is saturated in this way, you just sit there. Here the images of a well of spring water coming up in a lake or of lotuses totally immersed in a lake, saturated from their roots to their tips with the water. Finally, there is the image of a person sitting with a white cloth covering the whole body. The awareness is bright, fills the whole body, and is very still, with the same kind of steadiness as the flame of an oil lamp, the flame of a candle in a still room. So you have to look after your stillness. This is called having respect for concentration. One of the verses we chant regularly is one who is ardent with respect for concentration. There's steadiness in the ardency. It's not that you throw yourself into it for the whole night and then collapse, too tired to do anything for the next several days. You try to maintain a kind of steadiness. Breath in, breath out, breath in, breath out, and it's the consistency that makes all the difference. States of concentration often start out small. You can think of them as little shoots growing up in a path. Grass shoots, weed shoots, flower shoots, all growing up in the path. And if you're not really discerning, figuring which are the shoots you don't want in the path, and which are the ones you do, you step on everything. But if you notice, this is an oak shoot, take care of it, because we can use an oak tree around here. It can give shade if it's an oak tree or give fruit if it's a fruit tree. Those are the shoots you watch out for. If you take care of them, water them, make sure you don't step on them, they'll grow. It's the same with states of concentration. They often start out small, innocuous and anonymous. But if you notice that a little state of stillness and focus on it, then the steadiness of your focus is what allows the concentration to grow. This is why patience is such an important quality. We all know that we need more patience, but we're very impatient about getting those lessons from patience. We wish patience would hurry up and give us patience from those lessons so we can get on to the next thing. It doesn't work that way. You take your time. Not that you dawdle, just that you're careful about what you do. Then the results grow. Once the mind is in a steady state of concentration, you want to master it. What you want is the kind of concentration that serves a real purpose, and this is where the issue of discernment comes in. There are lots of uses for concentration, just as there are lots of states of concentration you can get into. You want a state that's mindful, alert, fully aware, so you can use it to understand the problem of why there is suffering in life. This was the Buddha's great discovery, realizing that this is the best issue to use your concentration for. There are other ways of using concentration. You can use it as a kind of hideaway, or you can use it to develop psychic powers. All kinds of miraculous things can come from the power of concentration. In fact, there's a huge literature in Thailand of all the amazing things that people with strong powers of concentration can do. But that's not necessarily the best use of concentration. The first order of business is the whole issue of suffering. Why is there suffering in the mind? In particular, why does the mind create its own suffering? You'd think if you had any intelligence, the mind wouldn't cause itself to suffer. But that's the whole problem. We're not very intelligent about how we manage our minds. So what you want is to use your powers of concentration, alertness, and mindfulness to look into how the mind is creating its own suffering, where the things are that it's latching onto, where its clingings are. We look for these clingings, because whatever it clings to, there are going to be problems as soon as that thing changes. You cling to the body, you cling to feelings, perceptions, thought constructs, consciousness, whatever. The clinging in and of itself is suffering. So this is the prime use for your powers of concentration. If other powers develop, okay, well and good, as long as this one is the first order of business. Look into the question of where the mind is creating unnecessary suffering for itself. Look at the way you relate to your thoughts. Or if pain arises in the body, that's a prime issue right there. The Buddha likened it to being shot by an arrow, in that the mind goes in and creates more issues and shoots itself with a second arrow. We're so busy in shooting those arrows that there are not just 2 arrows. There's a whole swarm of arrows we shoot at our pain. So we're sitting there with just a little pain in our leg or pain in our back, but it's riddled with arrows. We create all kinds of issues around it that just add on to the suffering. If there weren't that basic clinging to the body to begin with, then the pain in the body wouldn't be an issue for the mind. But wherever there's clinging, you create a bridge for suffering to come into the mind. And you keep on maintaining that bridge. This is what we've got to be sensitive to. That we're constantly keeping that bridge in good order. Sometimes we drop that bridge, but it's because we've built a bridge to something else and then more suffering comes in from that other source. And we're always focused on getting things quickly. Why won't this pain go away? Hurry up and teach me your lessons and go away. It doesn't work that way. First you've got to look at the mind's commentary around the pain, seeing exactly where the issue is within that commentary, where the false assumptions are. This is why having a good solid state of concentration based in the body is so important. It helps get you out of that dialogue in the mind. Sometimes it's not a dialogue, it's a shouting match. It's a whole lot of people shouting at each other. But if you're firmly grounded in the breath, firmly grounded in the body, you can just watch this conversation, this commentary in the mind without getting involved. That's what allows you to see through it, to see which voices are wounding the mind with arrows of the tongue. Then you can disarm them. Today's reading concludes with an invitation for your continued journey. As Buddha advocated the act of giving and disseminating teachings for the betterment of humanity, we echo this call. Join us in spreading these invaluable teachings by subscribing, liking, and sharing. Your support ensures that these teachings reach every corner, enriching lives far and wide. Embrace this opportunity to be a catalyst for positive change and enlightenment. We eagerly anticipate your presence in the next episode, united in our mission to illuminate minds and foster compassion across the globe.